Hello there, it's Cookies, and today I'm gonna try to do an EA Relay review now that I've played the nation. I'm gonna go over just a little bit of the lore for the nation, some national traits, different spells, items that I would recommend. Also, gonna go over some of the national strategy, some things to watch out for, I guess. Or if you're fighting them, I guess some things to use against them. And I've got everything printed out. And I guess I'll also go over some summons that I think might have potential. So what it's not going to be, though, just to save some time, is it's not going to focus on underwater combat. Uh, this last game I played, I was the only underwater nation, so I don't think it's fair for me to comment on something that I haven't actually fought. I don't think I have that kind of experience to just know either. So I guess I could go over a little bit of my background. So uh, I've I've been playing Dominions for a long time, probably for about oh gosh, probably close to 10 years, if not longer. But I only started playing multiplayer late last year, and when I decided to jump into multiplayer, I wanted to kind of record a lot of my games just so I'd have something I could go back to and see, to be able to see my past experiences. And if anyone else watched them, that's great. But I always liked seeing the different perspectives of a lot of the different streamers, just being able to see their ideas, their thoughts, how they played, what mistakes they made. So yeah, I just wanted to be able to do something similar. Uh, it's why I don't really advertise the videos. I tend to do like kind of like Netflix style dumps when I'm done with a campaign. Like it's like if anyone's interested, they can go watch it, but otherwise it's primarily for myself. So, and it's kind of nice having the turns recorded like that sometimes because I can go, if I'm playing in the middle of a game, I can go back a couple of turns and see what I was thinking or what I was planning for something. So that's also pretty nice. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. So the lore for Relay is they're a race of Abelis, I believe based on the author H.P. Lovecraft. And Abelis also feature heavily in, or not heavily, but they're a feature in Dungeons and Dragons, along with Illithids and the little Mind Blaster guys. These Androdai and Androlus and later the Starspawn kind of have a little bit of a resemblance. They're not exactly the same, but I think it's somewhat uncanny, and I'm sure that's based on the novels, but I've never read the novels. So that's a little bit of the lore. It's not based, unlike a lot of the other nations, it's not based on a particular nation's mythology. So, and for that reason, I've kind of found them interesting because they're unique. They're not grounded in history and geography, which I also find really interesting. But yeah, so let's go through some of the units. So I already did a video kind of talking about the different units. I don't think my thoughts on a lot of the units have changed. I still don't like recruiting these polypole mothers or the grandmothers. I think if I were doing an underwater knife fight, I would recruit them more. If there was pawns where I needed a holy three to claim, like you can trivially get the holy threes, the bishop fish, and they can move around easier than this can. But if you can get this to teleport, if you give it a ring and a crystal coin, like a ring of sorcery or something. So, I mean, having a teleporting holy three can be useful if you're doing like a throne rush where somehow you need an underwater throne. It has 100 HP, which is also nice. It's only got 2 miscellaneous slots, so it can't teleport and exist on land at the same time, which is awkward because it means it's not truly you can't even like get it on land in a janky way because it would just die immediately. Maybe you could. I don't think there's a bless option for that either, so I think you're just kind of stuck like this. Maybe you could empower it in nature and do like a transformation, and maybe you could get something interesting that can move around that way. I don't know. There's probably there's better things to do with 300 gold than hire this, I believe. In terms of like kind of the national concept, you have a roster of slave troopers who have all been somewhat they've been either enslaved or mentally lobotomized. So you have a whole bunch of slave troopers. My favorites are the slave guardian because they have a hat, they have some armor, and they have an 18 damage trident with length 3. They also have terrible morale. My other favorites are, and I like these ones less, but the nets can come in handy. Maybe if you're fighting elves or something, that you can throw a net on them. If they don't die faster, then they can throw the net. I think I like these guys for the underwater combat. The or not those guys. The ones with armor. Where are they? Yeah, these ones with 11 protection. Sorry, I've got the sprites mod on, so I don't quite recognize everything yet. But yeah, these guys have 11 protection and a 20 damage trident. They're great for underwater fights. And then you've got everything moved around too. I think that's my other issue. You've got 5 gold Lobo Guard, these guys. And what's great about these guys is they're 5 gold, 50 morale. They have the magic being tag, which is a drawback, but they're amphibious. And they have 1.4 siege strength. So you can hire hundreds of these guys very quickly and pop any fort in the game if you need to. And you can stack these guys on an aboleth or a mind lord, and you can gateway whole armies of these guys, or in later astral travel whole armies of these guys onto forts or into forts. So you can train stuff far away, and then it can just kind of show up on someone's border. It can be very shocking, especially with local recruitment the same turn. And let's see. So yeah, you have kind of like the amphibious and some of the aquatic, like was it the Tritons? The aquatic Tritons, but amphibious mermen, amphibious Atlanteans, all slaves. You have the Lobo Guard, which are the lobotomized guys. You have Shambler Thralls, which are the same thing, but older and larger, because Atlanteans get larger as they age. So 20 gold, 24 HP tramplers. In my experience, I'm not sure if I'd recommend these guys. I don't think I'd recommend them for expansion, because if they ever encounter a horse, they're not going to know what to do because their attack is so bad. And 24 HP won't carry them very far with the protection they have. I have a feeling that they get better in the mid-game when you can buff them. But before the late game, when all the stuff that abuses their magic being tag comes out. So I think these things have a sweet spot. And I'm sure you could use them for certain provinces in expansion, but I would probably prefer Slave Guardians or these ones, the Triton ones, if you're underwater. Additionally, you have some Mind Blasters. They're pretty cool, but they're aquatic, which is a drawback. So you have to go get onto land, which is going to be the main focus of this, to get the Androlith, which is your amphibious Mind Blaster. You can only get these guys in coastal forts. So it's not necessarily the worst idea with Relay, to build a ton of forts underwater and on the coastline, just so you can recruit all the things that you need where you need them. And part of that reason, I think, at least in my experience, your troops will die in droves all the time. And I'm going to talk about that in the strategy section. It was at least my experience in my game. So, and it can be somewhat difficult getting the magic you need to help your troops not die in droves, especially against certain factions. You have a recruitable scout, but because there's no indie underwater scouts, it can be kind of awkward. You might have to use fort turns to get this guy, which sucks. You have this guy, who's your commander. You have the slave mage, who's pretty good. Low morale, but low upkeep, and gets a ton of useful paths. And then the aboleth is just more of the same, except death instead of nature. And then the Abadai is more of a death-focused mage. So, and yeah, so sometimes you can get the death random and you can twice born them, but otherwise it's going to be really hard to twice born these guys, and I'm not sure if you want to. I did in my game, but it was kind of like a crappy situation, so I'm not sure if you'd actually want to. But if you do, I believe you get a size 4 undead, who I believe is amphibious, and that can be really strong as well. So it might be doing partially for that reason. And Mind Lords are pretty great. A lot of them will be able to just gateway on their own without items, but you're definitely going to need a lot of crystal gear as this nation, which is, you know, easily obtainable because you get earth randoms on a lot of your people. So definitely you should take advantage of all the crystal gear options, and you can use crystal gear to wire in anything into your communions that you might need. You just need to be careful about not burning them out. So maybe forge some bows or little staves that they can use to cast spells with, instead of casting bigger fatigue spells. And then these guys are kind of interesting because they're insane. They're also magic beings, which is a drawback. But they get this stuff. And I think these guys make really good site searchers. And speaking of site searching, underwater I generally prefer to do remote site searching because Voice of Tiamat is just so efficient. Now, you can manually site search, maybe with a nature or a death mage, but every time you manually site search a province, if it's not the province with a lab, you're spending 2 turns to do that. And if you take magic scales on this nation, sacrificing 26 research to save a few gems is kind of a trade-off that I'm not sure I'd always recommend, because you can pump out a lot more research in the amount of time it takes some of your guys to walk around. So maybe manually site search on land, but remote site search underwater, that might be my recommendation. I did a mix of both, but another interesting thing that you can do with these guys is you can use Mind Vessel to boost their paths. I believe it caps out at Astral 5. So I think you need an Astral... I forget if it's... You might need like an Astral 5 or an Astral 6 Pretender to cap these guys out at the maximum amount. And then you have... And then if you make them you can also make them a prophet. You can have a teleporting prophet, which is pretty handy, who's amphibious. But I think the cooler benefit is just having an Astral 5 that you got for 15 gems, which is half the price of a golem. And I think Mind Vessel also gives them the Mindless tag, but I'd have to go back and check. And that could also be a bonus. It'd put them closer in the same tier as the golem, they just have less HP. So, continuing on, let's see. All right, so kind of looking at some of the paths. So the paths on Relay you're mainly a water and astral nation. And the problem with that is there is a cool astral late game, but you don't do it as well as maybe like Pelagia, where you do Nexus and Whoosh, and then you can turn that into a bunch of globals and oppressive summons and a bunch of gems. So one of the things that I would consider as Relay is you have a little bit of death access, and I think if I were to replay my Relay game, I would try really breaking into high death. There's a number of advantages to death summons. Almost all of them are amphibious, and so if you need to, you can withdraw them underwater, which is really nice. So they interact really well with your national troop lineup. You can get immortals, which is really nice. That's a nice power creep. It gives you elite units that you can use to really kind of like beef up your armies and your raiding game. You can get Tartarians for magic diversity. Now, generally, Tartarians, I think from what I've heard from a lot of players, is they're kind of overpriced for what you get because so many are feeble-minded. But I think it would be worth it to have one or two Tartarian casters, and then you can slowly just get, like, it might take a few turns, but you'll get something useful. You don't necessarily know what it'll be, but it'll be a super combatant. It'll have some paths, and it might break you into something new. So, I really think kind of like going into that Immortal and Tartarian game would be a good play on this nation. And I think it would complement the astral part of your nation well. And you already have some death magic, so I think it would be pretty easy to adapt and break into. Additionally, you have high water, which means you can do the Streams from Hades to get a water 3, death 3, and that can start breaking you into higher death as well. Because with that, you can also get Mound Fiends, which means you can get, like, even when they're not doing something, they can be making skeletons for you. So there's just a lot of really good death summons. Specters are really good. So, yeah, so I think that covers death magic. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar. Another useful path for Relay, I think, is you don't need a lot of it. I mean, if you could completely break into it, that'd be nuts. But just a dash of blood magic is really good for Relay. Sorry, someone's driving by. But a dash of blood magic and at least one blood 3, earth 2. So you can, I think it's blood 3, earth 2. So you can make bloodstones is really good because it's the only way to get consistent earth 2s on your nation. Considering you can only ever random earth 1s. So, and generally your guys don't get the miscellaneous slots. And so being able to break into, it's actually kind of tricky to break into Earth, and if for some reason you aren't doing the Worthy Heroes mod, it's extremely difficult to break into Earth. So having, yeah, because you only ever have Earth 1, which is really only useful for self-buffing, but you need Earth 2 to be able to start doing stuff for your other troops. So being able to somehow get access to bloodstones would be really good. Additionally, yeah, so I think those are the two kind of like paths that I might try to focus on if I were playing, is finding some way to break a little bit into blood and finding a way to break deep into death. You can do nature or water. I mean, you're already broken into water, but you can try to break into nature and air and some of these other paths, but it's really difficult. With nature, you can at least site search it, and then you can empower in nature. You'll want to do it on one of your nature randoms for these guys, and then you can make a thistle mace, and then you can get a moonvine bracelet, and then you're broken into nature. The other way to do it is to have a water random and just get a naiad, and then you're broken into nature. But you will have to empower one of these guys at some point to do moonvine bracelets. So, but nature gems are so good for so many things that I think I prefer death for getting the kind of quality troops the nation's really lacking. And I prefer a dash of blood for trying to help break into Earth a little bit. So, and finding a way to break into at least Troll Kings would be really good. You can probably find a way to buy Earth boots off somebody, and that would break you into Earth, because you can get one of these guys onto land, or you can empower, I guess, if you really need to. And then you can make Earth boots, and then you can make a hammer, or no, maybe not yet. Well, if you empower them and then you put on the Earth boots, yeah, then you can make a hammer, and then you're kind of like broken into Earth. But we'll talk about one of the national heroes who can also make it a lot easier to break into Earth. In terms of some of the national strengths, some findings that I had, and this would change between a map nuke map where all the provinces are about the same size, and a normal game where the water provinces can be like 3.5 times bigger than a land province. But one of the things I found was controlling Dominion is really easy, and you have a lot of tools to control Dominion. You have these guys, you have these guys, you have the Polypal mothers, you have the grandmothers. You have a lot of tools to control Dominion with. So even though you're underwater and you might be under a lot of Dominion pressure, I think you can control that Dominion pretty easily. So I don't, and your sacreds, unless you're preparing for an underwater fight, I don't think you're going to want a lot of sacreds. So you can run a really low Dominion build and use those points on other scales, which I think is pretty cool. It's one of the strengths of the nation. Some other strengths are just like are the, I guess it would be the excellent siege strength I talked about earlier, where, I mean, you just have a lot of siege power. Like these guys have 1.2, these guys have 1.4, these guys have 2.6. So you can mobilize a lot of siege power very quickly, and you can break forts very easily. So one of the things you get to save on all throughout the game is spending gems on siege chaff. Like you're never gonna have to make cave grubs. You don't have to make eagles. You don't have to, although eagles are great for patrolling, but you don't have a blood economy really, so you don't have to worry about that. Just a lot of the different siege strength units that people build, you don't have to do that because it comes on your national nation. So you can save a lot of gems that way. Another thing, and I guess another strength, is just being underwater, having voice of Tiamat to do site searching is really nice. Having really high base astral, where you can just build a mage and teleport, is also extremely nice. And that same teleporting mage can also do water elementals without any delay. So you can teleport, water elemental spam, and I mean, that's just really strong. You can self buff if you want. Potentially you can twice spawn if you want. Although 30 gems on this guy for twice spawn is rough. I don't even think the undead version of this might be worth it. I forget, you might get like the underwater tart chassis. I forget. I'd have to look into that. So it might be worth doing. And so there are some interesting things you can do. The slave mage is an extremely good mage. But I mean, this mage also runs into a lot of the problems that human mages run into. And it's got very low morale. It's got 10 hit points. So a lot of the things that affect human mages also affect this guy. So there's definitely some strengths, but unfortunately there's not a lot of strengths. This nation really has a lot of holes that you're going to try to have to cover in some way. And that's why I was mentioning death magic so much. But the biggest thing that I ran into in my game was trying to figure out an efficient way to kill elites. Nothing in your national lineup, unless that elite has low MR, nothing in your national lineup is great at killing elites. And when I'm saying elites, I mean maybe 20 or 30 HP or more, hard hitting with decent armor, decent morale, decent MR. So for instance, in my campaign, I was running into Wind Riders, and I was running into Demons of the Heavenly Rivers, and there's nothing in the roster that efficiently deals with that. Now, you can try to soul slay that stuff, but it's going to fail a lot. You can try to Frozen Heart that, but you have to cast it multiple times. And when those sacreds are killing, I don't know, like 1 to 2 of these guys every single turn, and your army's disappearing and your morale checks are getting hit, it doesn't take them very long to break your front line and start getting to your mages. And so your mages just don't have enough time to wear down those elites. And you're having to mobilize a lot of mages to even fight, like to even be able to take a fight with these elites. Whereas the enemy only has to mobilize a few mages to buff their elites, and then they're set. So it's another unfortunate part of especially mid-game fights with Relay, where you're having to mobilize a ton of mages and other nations are busy researching. And this is a very research-hungry nation, because one of your prime path, which is Astral, every major research school seemingly has an Astral 9 spell that you really want, but they're all in different trees. So for instance, you have Nexus, you have Whoosh. I think Whoosh is Alteration. I think Nexus is Enchantment. Astral Travel is Thaumaturgy. And then Tarts, which are the Death Summon, are over in Conjuration. So you have a lot of different 9s that you're trying to get to, rather than a lot of nations where they hit certain timings at 7s and 8s, and then they're kind of set. So in some ways, you're forced to mobilize your mages, but in other ways, you really don't want to mobilize your mages, because then you're really weakening the power spikes you get in the game, which come really late, I guess, in the late game. And then as your magic is coming online in the late game, all of your troops are becoming worthless, which is just another drawback. So like all your magic being tag guys start running into issues. It's possible to run into the same issues as Airmore, or maybe maybe you get the arcane magic leadership bless on these guys, or you have these guys and they're walking around some like little pile of these guys, but these guys are all mindless and they soul slay your guy or they magic duel your guy, and now you lose your whole raiding party. So you can run into that a lot. They can do all sorts of mass enslave or mass destroy spells based off the magic being tag. They can abuse your low morale with Wailing Winds, Blood Rain. And so there's just a lot of really big weaknesses in this troop lineup right as your mages are starting to come to the fore. Okay, I'm back. So diving into some of the problems with elites. Another typical solution to elites is summoning water elementals, which are really great, and they have the armor-piercing damage for their crushing attacks. But you're spending a lot of gems and mage turns to use that resource. And one of the things that I ran into is there are elites out in the world, like those demons of the heavenly rivers, that trade really well with water elementals. And so if that's your only answer, then you're kind of done. And water elementals are a one-time use thing. And so if you're trading gems for someone's gold units, sometimes it can feel bad. I would say most of the time it's still going to be an efficient trade, and it should work pretty well for you. But it's something to be aware of, that you might want more options. And ideally, you should have some sort of your own elite unit for the armies of Relay, especially since these guys fall off just so hard. And so, yeah, and it can affect your ability to also break into nature and death magic if you're using a lot of your water gems for fighting. Additionally, it could be nice, like, so the Naiad warriors, the Kidnids, I think, they're pretty cool. They have all 4 and decent stats, but they also take water gems. And they're one of the few decent amphibious, I guess you could call them elite units. And so if you want to fill out your armies with a higher quality troop, you're going to impact your ability to do water elemental spam. So you kind of have to consider your options there. And I don't know, you could get elite units that don't have the amphibious tag or the poor amphibian tag. I think one of the things I would be worried about is it's really easy to get pushed back into the water as Relay. And if you hire these units, it'll be difficult to bring them back with you. You could do like a Sea King's Goblet and drag some of them back, but largely it could just be very difficult to bring them back with you. And there's kind of like an infrastructure piece to it where you have to put this Sea King's Goblet, and if you're under siege, maybe you have to gateway out. So now you've spent 25 gems to save your elite units when you could have hired amphibious ones and maybe left the turn prior. Stuff like that. So, and then there's, considering your other kind of like national paths, I would consider Death and Nature to be national paths because you can break into them so easily using water magic. So, but there's not a whole lot of great nature summons, and there's so many good nature mages and nature spells and nature globals that I would feel bad using nature gems to get anything other than those things. Like, I'd want to be getting Vine Ogres, and I'd want to be getting Naiads, and well, they would use nature gems in battle. I'd want to be maybe trying a few transformations. I'd want to be able to get worm mages for the immortal game. And you have Mother Oak, you have Gift of Health. There's just a lot of good nature stuff that I would feel bad spending nature gems on, different nature like troop summons. And I'm generally not super impressed with a lot of them. And I guess the other path to look at is Earth. So assuming you do break into Earth, which, I mean, it's doable, it can just be tricky. I think a good summon using Earth Gems would be the Clockwork Horrors. And Earth Gems are also a really valuable gem, but I don't think they're as valuable for this nation as Nature Gems. And so you can get those Clockworks to kind of give yourself like a little blender, potentially anti-elite infantry unit that has resistances. So it might be a good troop option for the late game. Although not too late in the game, because then the battles drag out and they just fatigue out. So maybe good for different raiding squads, stuff like that. But yeah, so I would say not having your own elite troop and not having a really effective counters unless it can be killed by Soul Slay or Frozen Heart or Water Elementals. And don't get me wrong, those can kill a lot of things. But if it can survive those things, you don't really have answers to it, and that's not good. So maybe, I don't know, maybe in the late game you can start using some of the death magic stuff too. So you can start doing like Dust to Dust or Hand of Death or Drain Life, stuff like that. So, so yeah, I don't know. I felt very vulnerable on land. And so I ended up trying to negotiate somewhat unfavorable borders with land powers just so that I can have peaceful borders with them. And that way I could get my foothold on land and I could start getting my Mind Blaster guys and these guys. So you don't need a lot of these guys, but you do need some. So that was kind of the plan there. Another big weakness for the nation is scouting. It can be hard to set up a scouting network. If you don't find land-based scouts right off the bat, which was an issue I ran into, then you end up using fort turns to produce scouts. I ended up just recruiting scouts whenever I was doing big infrastructure spends where I couldn't afford mages. So I think that's a good time to get scouts. And then let's see. I guess one of the things you could do to augment this is you could use black servants because they have higher map move. They're ethereal, I believe. They have more hit points, so I like them in the late game because they can actually survive a hit of flames from the sky, and they have a lot of cold resistance because they're undead. So maybe you could spare a few gems for a couple of those, and they could be your gem meals. Let's see, we covered how annoying it is to break into national paths. Okay, I guess another weakness, this one's really big too, is even if you do get onto land and you set up your coastal forts, when you get away from those coastal forts and you start trying to take over, like say you take over someone's cap and it's not a coastal cap, you're not going to have any recruitment options other than ND troops. And the problem with ND troops is everyone has an answer to ND troops because they killed them all in expansion. So not having any national recruitment options on land is really a bummer, especially as you go further inland. You have to recruit like garbage light infantry. Archers could be nice, but it is really is a huge drawback because archers are really kind of get phased out after the mid game. So you find yourself just left with a lot of like indie human infantry, unless you find a cool site or a cool indie pop type, and those can be hard to mass. So you could end up with just an eclectic bunch of garbage. Another weakness is uh, just as a nation, so many things rely on astral. So I guess to kind of put this into view, you use astral gems for different summons. Maybe you want to get golems. You use astral gems in combat for things like magic duel, power of the spheres, for big battlefield enchantments like Will of Fates or anti-magic. You use astral gems for your crystal gear, so you use it for a lot of items. You use it for herald lances, which are a morale item. You use it for the morale hat. Not the earth fire one, but the other one, the 10 pearl hat that also gives +1 inspirational. And there's just a lot of things vying for that one gem pool. You also need it for all the big globals you want, so you're gonna have to save up at some point to do Nexus, which means you're gonna be gimping your armies a little bit, or gimping your like the items you're constructing, so that you can put up Nexus at some point. You want it for wish spam, you want it for strands of arcane power, just a whole bunch of different things that you want pearls for, and I feel like you're just never gonna have enough. I traded for what felt like hundreds of pearls from Femoria, and even then I think at the end of the game I just about spent them all trying to put up that last fight. So it can definitely be hard when so many of your national options, even your national spells, use pearls. So like Mind Vessel and Enslave Sea Trolls are both 15 pearl spells. One gives you a mage, one gives you some, I guess, some elite troops, but it's elite troops on using a gem type that you don't want to use for elite troops. So it's just a real big feels bad when your nation is so singularly focused on one gem type, because it can be really hard to find gem sinks for your other gem types, and then you're starved for the one that you actually derive a lot of your combat power from. Or I guess a lot of your strategic power, and then water gems are a lot of your combat power, but you can also get a lot of combat power from astral gems. Um, Diving into some spells, I guess. So maybe for this one, I'll load up a quick test game. Alright, so I've got a few pretenders that I'm going to show off later, like just different things to think about. Alright, so in terms of research, some of the key battlefield spells that you'll want to look at are in. So just kind of going through the list, we've got Curse of Stones in Alteration. So this one's pretty nice. I do think one of the national strategies in your tool belt is potentially Fatigue Plays, because you will have access to Rigor Mortis and Quagmire, and you could also do Curse of Stones. And if you take penetrate like a penetration bless, it has a better chance of working. So that could be nice. And if you cast it from a communion, it has an even better chance of working. So it is MR negates easily, but you have some tools to help counteract that and help more enemy units fail it, and potentially do a big fatigue play. And even your shitty slave troopers can kill passed out enemies. So that's one spell I'd look into. Another good one is Maws of the Earth. Just keeping enemies still so that your troopers can hit them, and then it also does damage, which is really nice, like armor piercing damage. So this is another good one. Control is another one that I like. This one, because again, it's taking advantage of potentially a penetration blast. You spend a pearl and you can try to steal something, and maybe you can gift a reason that thing later, and it can help expand your magic diversity. So definitely, I guess one of the lore themes is the abelisks do a lot of mind control. So definitely try to take advantage of that and play into that so that you can maybe expand your magic diversity, get new units, get cool things. So I like control, and it comes fairly early on too, which is nice. Another spell to consider is Skeletal Legion. Generally, you don't always want to. You want to be careful about casting this, because you want to cast it when the majority of the enemy is doing piercing damage, but you don't always want to do it if you have a bunch of elite troops, because they can get diseased, and that can suck too, especially if the enemy just like gem burns you and then you disease a bunch of your guys. However, all your guys suck, and you don't really care if they die that much. So Skeletal Legion is great. Go ahead and cast it, and it can be really strong even in underwater fights. Yeah. Where everything's piercing damage anyways for the most part. So definitely consider that. Another good spell is Darkness. So what's nice about Darkness with your troops is almost all of your troops, I think all of them, have dark vision, and potentially even full dark vision. So that means you're not going to be affected by darkness, and your enemies will. So for instance, if we take a look at the roster, let's see. So we have full dark vision on the Atlanteans. The Mermen don't, and the Tritons don't. But generally, a lot of your armies are going to be these Atlanteans, and they do have full dark vision. So as long as you build your army around it, and your abelisks have spirit sight. So you can definitely build an army where you don't care about darkness. And Frozen Heart and Soul Slay and stuff from these guys are all, I believe, 100 precision, so they're not going to care about darkness. And Mind Blasting doesn't care about darkness. Enslaved Mind doesn't care about darkness. So you have a lot of tools that work perfectly well in darkness, and so take advantage of that. So let's see, where were we? So yeah, so there's darkness. Another one to consider is maybe Army of Giants. Getting some more HP on your guys, some more strength so they hit harder. Their defense is garbage anyways, so I wouldn't worry about that, but yeah, just making your army beefier can be good. Maybe they'll take 2 hits to kill instead of 1. I don't like that one as much as some of the other ones, but it's an option. Another decent one is Marble Warriors. So upping the protection on your guys can be really strong. So I think with this they would go to probably like 15 or 16 protection, if I'm guessing right. I could be off, because I think it's 11 and then 15 natural So I don't know, that sounds like 16. And at that that's definitely a spell where, now they'll take 2 hits to kill. So it can be really good. Buys your other mages longer to kill things. Or for a fatigue play to work. Another, I know I'm just kind of going through a lot of spells here, but hopefully you're getting some ideas. Another one that I really like is Doom. And Doom I like because again, it plays well with a penetration plus. So if I remember right, the way it works is they get just 1d6 instead of the 2d6 DRN when they're rolling for stuff. So I think they just end up getting unlucky on a lot of things. So Doom I really like, and if you cast that before a lot of your other big spells, they'll have a much better chance of working. So if you cast Doom and then a bunch of controls, or if you cast Doom and then something like Solar Brilliance, then you're going to affect a lot more enemy units. And so I would almost consider it like a force multiplier spell. It's not always necessary on every nation, but for Relay, I feel like it's especially strong. Another really strong spell for Relay is Mass Protection. So again, just putting 10 natural protection on all your troops. So I think that would move them. I think. Okay, so maybe the Marble Warriors moves them up to like 17 or 18, and this is like 15 or 16. I don't know. But they giving 10 natural protection, making your troops more durable. It's super safe underwater to cast because no one's really ever going to be able to take advantage of the fire malice. So there's very few things that do fire damage underwater. So just a really good spell. It's a great early timing for, I mean, I say early, but it's alt 7. But it's a key target for your nation is getting to Marble Warriors, Doom, Mass Protection. And if you've somehow managed to break into air, like Fog Warriors, because this gives you a mid-game army. Like you can actually go and fight people with this magic. So let's see. Continuing to move down in enchantment, you have Warriors of Niflheim, which is really easy to cast. +5 fire resistance is really important. I got wiped a couple of times by Firestorm because I had no way to put fire resistance on my units, and if I'd gone down to alt 8, I could have done that. So you do have a little bit of a national vulnerability to fire, and it's not because of mass protection, it's just because you don't have easy ways to get that resistance. Another good one is Ground Army, and it's for the same reason. It's so like these are kind of similar to the Fend spells in enchantment, except we're in alteration. So instead of costing 1 gem, they cost 2 gems, and they're a little bit harder to cast. Another really good one is Will of the Fates. Putting luck over all your crappy troops makes them way more survivable. So now they only have a 1 in 4 chance of dying when they normally would have just died. So Will of the Fates is really good. I'll call this like a key late game spell for Relay. And I mean, Time Stop can be sneaky good too. So it slows things down. So you get about, what is this, 5 rounds of combat. And you can just throw up a whole bunch of stuff. So you can do like Doom and then Will of the Fates, just like that. Kind of like right at the end of turn 1 before, everyone gets off their turn 2 stuff. So it can be pretty strong. If you have an innate caster pretender, you can do time stop into master and slave and cast that extremely fast too. I mean, they can probably still get off anti-magic, but you can get off multiple casts of master and slave before the enemy really has a chance to charge home and kill your troops. So I consider time stop a really important spell. Of course, you have Army of Gold and Army of Lead. Army of Lead is really nice because you get the +4 MR, which is really good for your troops. So if you don't have a anti-magic caster present, you can do Army of Lead. Army of Gold is really good because you get the +5 fire resist. So if you do have an anti-magic caster there, then you can paint your army with fire resistance, which is also good. Arcane Domination is really good, and you can cast that pretty easily as well. I say easily, but like with a communion, you can do this pretty easily, or just with a high astral caster like your pretender. And then I guess the final one to talk about is Army of Rats. You don't have a lot of ways to affect enemy morale, but Army of Rats would definitely be one. You just don't have a lot of things that synergize well with it, and it can be hard for you to cast. So, alright, so moving on from Alteration, we have Evocation. And like, I'm trying to focus on spells that are easy for your nation to cast, especially within a communion. So if I'm skipping over spells that would be really good for the nation, it's because I just consider them harder to get onto the field. It doesn't mean they're not good. So there's only a few that I saw in Evocation. One was Rain. It can lessen fire effects, and your nation has a hard time dealing with fire, like units, fire effects, and fire damage. So Rain can be really good. Another good one is Magic Duel. So if the enemy's big casters, and I tried to do a big Magic Duel play against TNG, and I would say it partially worked, but I needed to commit harder to it to have it really work. But Magic Duel can be really good. It uses a lot of pearls, and you lose a lot of your expensive and good slave mages doing it. But if you're in an emergency, it is definitely a tool in your tool belt. Another good one is Astral Tempest, in terms of like gem-costed battlefield spells that can be good for your nation. So Astral Tempest starts doing damage to everything that's non-mindless. And it makes spell casting more difficult. So if you've got some mindless mages, which you have ways to get, and you have a bunch of mindless troops, you can create like a specialized army, and maybe you just don't care about some of the troops too, but you can kind of create a specialized army to take advantage of this and really punish your enemy unless they have high MR. So this can be like an interesting play that you can do. In terms of enchantment, some like gem-costed battlefield spells to watch out for. You have, of course, anti-magic. As soon as you get this, you'll probably want to cast it just in case in just about every battle you're ever in. It's only Astral 3, only cost a pearl, and your troops need all the MR help they can get because their MR is terrible. So that's anti-magic. You also have Astral Healing, which can be nice. Additionally, in terms of the fatigue plays, we talked a little bit about Quagmire. So this is Quagmire. And there's also Rigor Mortis down here. I think it's a little bit down, further down. Wait, did I pass it? I thought it was like... Yeah, alright, so in Enchantment 6 you get Rigor. Also at Enchantment 5, you have Fell Vapors. Your armies are so expendable that it's entirely possible that you are just okay casting Foul Vapors over your army. And that's going to go into a little bit of a national strategy that I think might be possible with Relay that I'll talk about later. Another thing is also in here is Relief and Serpent's Blessing. So if you do care about the army, you can do Serpent's Blessing. And then you've also got Relief here, so that can be good. Solar Brilliance can be nice. Again, a lot of your spells are 100 precision. They can be blind and still hit things. And a lot of your troops are really garbage anyway, so you don't care if they're blind because they already can't do much. So blinding the enemy's valuable troops is definitely a strategy that you can pursue. Life After Death is nice as well. Forces them to kill all of your crappy troops twice. And yeah, so that's pretty nice. And you might end up with some mindless mages to play into the Astral Tempest play I was talking about, and some mindless troops. You can also, we talked about Servant's Blessing. You also get access to Frostfend, easy access. It's harder for you to do the other fens, but you have really easy access to Frostfend. So when we talk about scales, potentially, one of the scale for temperature scales underwater, I learned a really interesting interaction from some comments on one of the other videos I had. And so being able to do Frostfend and paint your army with 5 cold resist pretty easily means that you might lean towards taking cold scales for your temperature scale. Even though it'll affect your slave mages with more fatigue because they're all old, so they're going to pass out a lot faster if you do that, and you're going to get less income on land. But if you decide to take cold scales, then being able to paint your army with Frostfend is going to be really nice. That comes with Enchantment 8. Additionally, you get access to Mass Regen, which isn't as good on Relay because your stuff dies really fast. And you also get access to, but if you're going to do it, I would also try to make the effort to do the Army of Giants stuff so they can take better advantage of it. And then you also have Demon Cleansing. So if you run into various blood powers, then you can consider doing Demon Cleansing to give yourself a shot at winning those fights. Additionally, in Thaumaturgy, you've got Growing Fury. So one of your issues is your troops really like to run away. At least the ones that aren't 50 morale. It's either 7 or 50. So the ones with 7 morale, you can do Growing Fury, and they'll start going berserk. And so you'll have fewer troops. You won't have to worry as much about morale issues. So that's something you could consider. And if you somehow break into blood, you could do like some sort of bloodletting play where it's like Growing Fury, bloodletting, and then everything is berserk, and all your stupid little guys will fight till the end. Also in here is Ravenous Swarm, which is here. No, that's Gift of Reason. Ravenous Swarm, which can be nice for dealing with undead thugs. You can't cast it underwater, but it can be a really nice way to. It can give you a nice counter to different undead thugs that different nations might do. You can also get access to Plague, which is something you should consider, because even though it'll hurt your troops, it'll also hurt the enemy's troops. And again, that's fine, because your troops are eminently replaceable. Another nice one is Vortex of Returning. You can cast this pretty easily to get mages home from inside of a siege or a fort. So, and then the last couple are two more enslave spells. So you have Master Enslave, which I talked about earlier with the Time Stop combo. And then you also have Undead Mastery, which you could also combo with Time Stop, although it'd be more difficult. I think it'd be highly unlikely you had high astral and high death, but you know, it's an option. It's there. It's a lot harder for you to cast than Master and Slave. So that I think those are all the battlefield enchantments that I would consider, or I would look at. I would plan my strategies around. There's some nice to have ones that are require you breaking into other paths. So for instance, Solar Eclipse can be good. It's similar to Darkness, but it requires a fire astral mage. So it's really hard for you to cast, but it would be good. Fog Warriors would be really good. So I think we're back in enchantment or alteration. So Fog Warriors gives your whole army mist form. So that's really good. It gives your troops a lot more survivability, and you saw me use it in my campaign against Arco to pretty good effect. Another good one is the Warriors of Muspelheim, which I believe is a fire spell. Yeah, but this is a way to paint cold resistance on your army from the alteration tree. So if you find like Amber Clan mages, you can throw a little bit of crystal gear on them. You can cast this spell, and that will allow you to charge down alteration, but still get your resistances that you would normally get from, I don't know, enchantment with the fend spells. So, pretty good spell, and I would definitely consider this. In Evocation, there's a few more spells that are kind of hard to get to. So you have, but it really helps you on land if you happen to run into an archer civilization. So you have Mist and Storm, which will help you negate a lot of archery effects. You also have Acid Storm. Yep. So you can destroy the armor on enemy elite units, which can be really helpful. I mean, you'll destroy your own armor, but we've gone over that. And you can also do Meteor Shower, which is really good. And again, you might hit your own guys, and that's completely okay, because you'll also hit enemy troops. So, and this would pair really well with Will of Fates, if you cast that on your troops. Some other cool spells to consider would be in enchantment, you have Arrow Fend, again, negating archery. You have the different fend spells, so Fire Fend, Air Fend, or Thunder Fend, sorry. Fire Fend. And then you also have Fields of the Dead down here, which can be nice. And you also have Gaia's Blessing, which is down here. And this paints a bunch of resistances, which is nice, so it's like a catch-all. You just have difficult access getting the Nature Earth cross path. And then another one in Thaumaturgy is Soul Drain. So again, you don't necessarily care about your troops, and if you have a really important caster, like your Pretender, you happen to go like the High Astral Death again, you could do Soul Drain and start just like doing 2 armor negating drain damage to everyone. Put some pin gear on, have a penetration bonus, and watch your opponent be sad. Because again, you don't care about your troops, but the enemy cares about their troops. In terms of like, now leaving the battlefield, in terms of some neat spells that you might not think of, There is, I don't think I took a note about where they are in here. Let's see. Okay, so the first one would be Vengeance of the Dead. So what's nice about this one is it's still an MR check, but unlike Mind Hunt, you can't get feeble-minded if the enemy has an Astral Mage. And if they have a lot of kills, then you can assassinate them. So I used this in my relay game to kill the Firestorm caster that TNG brought. So pretty neat little spell, kind of niche use cases, but you're able to cast this naturally just on your nation using Abadai. So I think some of them can just roll the randoms to just cast this. So you get an astral random Abadai and they can just do this. Otherwise you might have to give them a crystal coin. Another neat one is Beast Mastery. So it's another mass enslave spell, but it's high nature, so you can do that in a communion. It would have to be a pretty large communion, so maybe like you give a Vine Ogre some crystal gear, and now you're only talking like 10 slaves, and you can do Beast Mastery. So that could be good against like a Marverni. Another good one, you have a lot of coastal forts. So another one that can be good is, for income, is Trade Wind. So you spend some air gems, which you don't have a lot of other uses for, and you can give yourself an income bonus, which can be really nice. In terms of elite troops, something that can give you some undead mages and some undead troops is Hidden in Snow. So it's, if you find yourself with a flurry of water gems and you don't feel like putting up a global like Vengeful Waters, you can use Hidden in Snow, and you'll probably be running magic scales, so you should get more mages, and you should get some undead troops that are like decent quality. And so if you have like a highlands or a mountains bordering your that you control or that is nearby, and if you happen to be running cold scales again, like Cold Relay, then this is definitely an option to give yourself some elite troops and some different mages that maybe have different cross paths. So just something to consider. Another thing to consider is potentially doing Dragon Master. Now, this isn't necessarily like you won't be able to take swamp drakes underwater, but you can pretty easily get swamp drakes, and this will allow you to get a bunch of swamp drakes for, if you put this on like a Naiad or something, and then give her a scepter, then I think you get 4 per cast, and that can be pretty nice. And then you can combine that with a Foul Vapors play, or maybe you put a line of your crappy troops in front of them, and then they can do all their breath attacks and hit the more valuable enemy troops. Just, some different things to think about. And then the last thing is Leprosy, which is, maybe it's not there. Yeah, so it's here. So Leprosy can be interesting, so you can disease valuable enemy units. So just another thing to consider that you can use. All right. Now, I've gone over a lot of spells that you can make really good use of in battles on the strategic map. There are a few spells that you're probably not going to be using, but that you should really watch out for from your opponents. Some of these are morale plays. You're very susceptible to morale plays. So, and even if you have 50 morale units, the commanders leading them are not 50 morale units. and they are susceptible to morale plays. So things like Wailing Winds, Blood Rain are both really scary spells. So be really careful fighting into a Helheim. You probably aren't going to match up well. Be careful for some battlefield wipes, because it can be hard for you to get down to your resistances and then paint your crappy troops with them. So things like Firestorm, Shimmering Fields, Flame Storm, those can all suck. Another one that can suck is Stygian Rains. Your troops don't have magic weapons. So if an enemy with magic weapons paints the battlefield in Stygian Rains, they're giving themselves a big advantage, and your troops might not hit hard enough or might only do chip damage. So something to watch out for. Another thing to watch out for is your troops' crappy morale, or not morale, MR. So your troops have really bad MR, which we can see here. So like, you have crappy morale and crappy MR. Well, I mean, it's average. Some of them are better than others, but your Lobo Guard have really bad MR at 5. Your Shambler Thralls are 5. So something to watch out for then is Wind of Death traps. They can kill like your whole army if they have penetration gear. Maybe everything but the mages. So be careful with that. Some other thing, more battlefield wipes, Nephil Flames, Meteor Shower. If you don't find air mages, archery can be a big weakness because you don't have national archers. So you can get hit with flaming arrows. Certain fatigue plays can affect you. If you're playing Cold Relay and you get hit with Heat from Hell, you'll have a hard time holding on to forts because other nations can do mass flight pretty easily. And your troops don't necessarily want to fly because they're so bad. It's kind of like the Kalem effect where you'd have to outnumber them a lot to get any value from it. Unraveling also attacks the bad MR on your magic being units. So like these guys would be very susceptible to unraveling. And so if you plan on using unraveling yourself, you probably want to leave those guys at home. Hell Power horrors would probably just rout your whole army. So definitely watch out for Hell Power. Agony, like again targeting the morale. Bloodletting, triggering a lot of morale checks. Call Horror, again, your guys will struggle killing those. Now, if they have mage support, a lot of Frozen Heart spam can kill them pretty quick. But if there's a lot of the horrors, then you could definitely be in trouble as all your troops just run away. And then another thing that can really kill your troops is damage reversal. So your troops won't be hitting a lot, so they might not be affected. But damage reversal on elites, or like the Blood Vengeance Bless, your mages will do a lot of damage, and so they'll just end up nuking themselves on enemy elites. And if it takes several Frozen Hearts to kill an enemy elite, you're going to be real sad when that elite kills 1 or 2 of your mages for every elite you kill, just through damage reversal, even if your mages have decent MR. So 15 MR. And then a remote attack that you might want to watch out for. So like besides some of the population killing events, you're actually immune from a lot of the remote attack spells while underwater, but Tidal Wave can really target your coastal settlements and deal large population and income loss. So I think that's it for the spells. I know this was kind of like a long segment, but I feel like Relay has so many weaknesses that you really need to dig through everything you can potentially do to like buff up your nation or attack enemy weaknesses. So I wanted to take a lot of time, go through those spells, and then I'll be taking a little bit more time to go through some potential summons for gem sinks to replace your crappy national troops. Alright, so going over some of those summons, I guess the first thing to talk about is the national spells. And I'll try to swap over to a screen capture so I can show off the Dominions for like database thing. So I'll be right back. Okay, sorry for the eye bleed, but hopefully this works. So we've got two national spells. So we have Mind Vessel here, where you spend 15 pearls. We kind of talked about it earlier to buff up one of your Androliths, no, Androdays, to up to Astral 5 for 15 pearls. So that's a decent summon. Another summon is Enslaved Sea Trolls, which is 15 pearls. And you get 5 of these slave trolls, but they're the good kind with armor. So I'm not sure if they cost upkeep. They probably do, because they've only got 12 morale. So, but maybe it's, yeah, it should be halved upkeep because they have the slave tag. So these could be pretty good. The problem with both of the national spells is, again, it uses pearls, and your nation's very hungry for pearls. So I would, personally, I probably wouldn't cast these a lot unless I controlled Nexus. And if I control Nexus, then it's an entirely different story. I probably wouldn't mind building a whole army of these slave trolls, because they have okay MR, they have okay morale, and they have 52 regenerating hit points, so they make a great front line, and they take buffs pretty well. So would definitely consider them. Another one to consider is, let's turn off the national only, would be Yetis. So the Yeti could be a good summon. For 13 water gems, you get 5+ of them. The hard part is just the air-water crosspath. If you're playing with worthy heroes, you can get a national hero that can summon them. And they can be really nice because if you happen to be fighting elves, they get this rock attack, and elves do not like getting hit by boulders. So this could be a really good summon to help you fight elves with. So I would definitely recommend this. And they could just be good in general. It's like better than your national troops. They're 46 HP. They have a lot of cold resist. They have a cold aura. So pretty cool. Another one is whites. So breaking into death, getting some death summons. Makes for a pretty good option. Hold on, I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. So I think we left off with whites. They're a pretty good troop. Good cold and poison resist, nice cold aura. I think the issue they run into is you really want to use death gems to break into death for thugs and super combatants. So I think maybe using water gems for elite troops might be a better idea, but you can definitely get these guys. I got a few of them. So definitely is something to consider. Another unit would be Banes. Good undead commander, similar to the white. So, in terms of a nature gem sink for units, you can go with Vine Ogres. They have a lot of HP, but they're going to have a similar issue to all of your Lobo Guard and Shambler Thralls in that they only have 5 MR. So for that reason, you might need to phase them out by the late game. Another one is, so we already talked about naiads. Now your water 3, nature 3 breaks you into high nature. But here's a look at the kidnids, which are the naiad warriors. So they have all 4, they're amphibious, they're one of the better amphibious troops. So definitely could be a good use for some water gems to get a front line that can hold up. They have good MR, good morale, decent stats. Their biggest drawback is 10 HP. So these might be excellent candidates for Army of Giants. Additionally, they have recuperation, so they'll play into some of the later national strategies that I'm thinking about. They'll play into those pretty well. Another option is the Bane Lord, which is just a bigger Bane, 42 HP, pretty nice, 20 protection, good MR, good morale, just a good commander. Let's see, another good option for commanders is the Sleeper. That's because he has built-in inspirational. He also has recuperation. So he plays well into the strategy of ruining your army to ruin the enemy's army, which is what I'm going to go into later. You have the Bishop Fish, which is a Holy 3 that you can get. You have your national Holy 3s as well, but this one can just walk around too, which is nice. Although for some reason he doesn't get the feet option. So I guess he has like flippers, and magic shoes can't fit flippers. Another one is Streams from Hades. This is going to be your ticket. The unit is the Koki Thead. And it comes from Streams from Hades. And this is your ticket into higher death. So you have water 3, death 3. Excellent mage is stealthy, so it can run around stealthily, and then it can drop things like darkness for you. Another interesting option is hill giants. So hill giants are size 6, so they'll eat enemy evocation spam. They have 9 MR, which is around average for most of your troops. Normally it's considered not great, but it's better than a lot of your troops actually. So with anti-magic it would come out at around 13. He has 106 HP, and the grab and swallow effect could actually be really good for killing enemy elite troops. So something to consider. Especially if you can find a way to point buff them. Then there's breaking into Earth. So you have your Troll King, which you get from Troll King's Court. This is a great spell. It gives you a bunch of somewhat elite troops that have regen. You also get this guy, which is a big Earth 3 mage. And yeah, it just gives you a tougher chassis to cast like Armies of X from, or Crowned Army. He's a really good mage. And you can give him some underwater breathing gear to get him around. It's not too hard. He can also make a good thug if you need him for that. Another really good spell, and this one's for underwater, is the Ether Lord and Ether Warrior. So Ether Gate, Conjuration 6. You get this guy and 15 of these guys. These guys are phenomenal. They have Moonblades, so they're excellent at killing magic beings. They also have the magic being tag, which sucks, but they have magic power, which if you take magic scales will make them even stronger. Additionally, they're ethereal, so they can walk through underwater walls. And for your trouble in getting these guys, which are great troops, you also get this mage, which can be Astral 4, which is really nice, with full slots, which is better than a lot of your Abelis. You can get Death 3, which is also really nice. You can get Blood 1, and like break into blood enough to get like enough blood slaves to empower someone to get bloodstones. And you can also break into air on these guys, because you can put them into a communion, and the air randoms can do air spells. So something useful that you can do with all of the randoms. It is a lot of pearls, and you are pearl starved, but this spell is so good for underwater it might be worth it anyways. And if you have Nexus up, I'd get a lot of these guys, because these guys will make great thugs, and these guys are great troops for fighting underwater. I mean, on land as well, but also underwater. They're phenomenal. So that's that. Additionally, there's ghosts, and they have a lot of the same strengths that the Ether Warriors do. They're ethereal, so they can go through walls. They have a fear effect, so they scare away enemies. So, great troops. I definitely recommend some ghosts. Another thug is the Spectre. Not that guy, though. Spectral Mage. Here we go. So, this guy makes a great stealthy thug. And he has a fear and a cold aura. So you can do all sorts of fun things kitting this guy out. The Earth ones are a great self-buff path. The water ones can also self-buff a little, or they can even Frozen Heart a couple of times before running in. The astral ones can do like personal luck, body ethereal on themselves, and the death ones can skelly spam. So just a really good unit again. They have a natural life drain, but you can definitely give them weapons. I don't know, really good mage. I like having one or two of these in a lot of my campaigns, actually. They're just really good. And stealthy astral mages can also, like, if you're thugging around with a Troll King, you can have one of these guys follow around stealthily. And if it's an astral one, it can help protect against Mind Hunt spam. So they have a secondary role that they can do as well. So let's see. And then there's the Forest Troll tribe. So these guys could be a pretty good option. Again, elite, semi-elite units with trolls, and help beef out Relay's armies. And then you also get a mage, which is nice. Let's see. What was the spell? I don't... No, it's not that one. Yeah, it's the tribe. Here we go. So you can get a troll shaman. And this gives you Death Nature cross paths, and potentially Death Nature Earth cross paths. So he can be an okay thug. But I mean, Death and Earth and Nature are really good thug paths. But it's just an interesting set of cross paths as well. Nature with Death and Nature with Earth and give you some more forging options. So maybe one or two, probably just one of these guys. See what you get. Let's see, another one could be Lamias. So you'll have a hard time getting Lamia queens unless you do the Forest Troll tribe. So maybe that could be an incentive to go that route. But Lamias are a really good troop. They have 50% regen. They turn into snakes when they die. So they take at least a couple of hits to kill generally. And they have cool like life drain attacks and venomous fang attacks, so a variety of damage vectors. So Lamias are pretty good. Lamia queens could be another way to break you into blood. And they can also get, they have a solid, like a reasonable chance at like death 3 and especially possibly death 4. They can break you into, yeah, and you might get access to blood nature. There's some cool items there. Yeah, so just a lot of stuff you can do with Lamia queens. You can do if you don't end up taking full growth, you can do blood fecundity. So pretty cool mages. As part of breaking into death, you can also go for mound fiends. So these guys are pretty neat, and even if you're not doing something with them, again, you can just have them animate skeletons. Otherwise, they can do big death spells, but the Kokithiads can also do this, and they're stealthy, so they might be a better candidate than these guys. But, you know, maybe having an option for some skelly chaff, you know, isn't the worst use for them. It's not efficient, but it's not the worst. Another option is jumping into the Immortal game with Wraithlords, and they can also summon ghosts, which are a really good troop for you. So I'd really recommend Wraithlords. And I believe you can cast this underwater. Yes, so you can make their Immortal home province underwater, which is really nice. And you can send them with a little specter buddy to feeble mind hunts. And then maybe you could also forge a amulet of anti-magic and stick it on them. And for just a, you know, like 3 pearls with a hammer, you make these guys way harder to soul slay and mind hunt, because then they'd be at 21 or 22 MR. Another good mage is the Ivy King. So a nature 3 mage. Doesn't have all the same paths as the Naiad, so you're missing the 3 water paths, but instead you get 63 hit points, so they're a lot tougher. And they can still run underwater, and they don't have homesickness. So you don't have to consider the whether or not you want to try a transformation with them. So just a really good mage. There's also I'm not going to go through them, but there's also the elemental royalty. So like the queens of elemental water could be really good. The tree lords could be really good. So getting like water 5s or nature 5s, and then having super combatants in your army of otherwise like really shitty troops can be really strong. Another good spell is, where is it? I think I'm spelling it wrong. Yeah, Fairy Court. You can get these fairy queens. You also get some little sprites, and the sprites are actually useful on Relay because they can help out with a fatigue play, and they provide ranged, like a ranged attack. So the sprites are actually pretty good for Relay, and then it also breaks you into high air magic, which is also really strong. Again, you can forge crystal gear, so they can plug right into a communion and do big air. They might burn out some of your slaves doing it, but that's okay, especially if it gets you Fog Warriors. So, pretty cool mage. Definitely worth summoning. Lots of nations like to go after fairy queens. Another option is Tartarians. So you can break into all sorts of magic paths using their randoms. So definitely worth considering as a late game strategy. We talked a little bit earlier about clockworks, so another unit to consider. They have all the resistances. They have a huge reinvigoration malice, but they have 18 protection, and they have 2 like reasonably high damage attacks. I think it's for 16 damage. So they're great troops. They can run in, they can blender some stuff, maybe depending on the enemy elite, they can potentially perform an anti-elite role, which is nice. And then they're also poor amphibians. You can pull them underwater if you need to. So another really nice summon. You also get access to golems. I'm not going to go too in depth, but golems are really good. So you can do a whole video on just different ways to do golems. Another decent spell with the Pale Riders. That's it. Yeah, here we go. Where you get 20 of these long dead horsemen. So this gives you like a nice flanking option in games. So they're not particularly tough, but they do have a lance attack, which is nice. And so, can provide some mass and combat power to your armies. So there are worse ways to spend death gems, that's for sure. There's the other immortal part of the immortal game, which is liches. So Death 4 Mage. Now you need to be Death 5 to even get them, so you need to have already broken into Death to even get them. But liches are pretty good. They can just, again, if you want, you can plug them into communions, or you can give them a Death Stick and they can do darkness. So lots of uses for liches. And their like counterpart is the Worm That Walks, the Worm Mage. So this is like nature's answer to the Lich, which is an immortal bug mage. So it can do nature 3 for you, so you can, like, you'll probably already be broken into high nature, but again, this is a spell you can cast underwater, so you can make their immortal home underwater, just like with the Lich as well. So you can definitely do a lot of immortals, just kind of like running out of the lake and attacking your enemies, which is something I'm having to deal with in my current Charlama game. And then the final summon I'm going to talk about is a really good late game summon, which you can get if you find like an Amber Clan province. And you can start getting these green lions. So they have a vitriol breath, which is really cool. And you can start massing green lions, and this is definitely like an elite style troop that you can use into the late game. It's got 16 MR, it's got 50 morale, so just a really good unit. And it's got this corrosive attack, which is AoE 1. It's armor negating, it's a magic weapon. So really good troop, and definitely worth trying to mass it as soon as you can get somewhat reasonable fire access. So, or fire water access, I guess. In terms of globals, globals are definitely worth thinking about. There's 2 that I would consider that I've never tried before. One is Guardians of the Deep, and the other one is Enchanted Forests. So let me kind of find those. So here's Guardians of the Deep. So you get some help with your PD, and sometimes you get like these emergent attacks, which can be really cool. And then Enchanted Forest is similar, except it originates from forests. So And then there's a lot of standard spells. There's different gem gens like Mother Oak, Maelstrom, Arcane Nexus, Earthblood Deepwell, and the 5 Astral Pearl Global. I'm forgetting the name of. Maybe Arcane Focus. I don't know. Um, you'll know it when you see it because it gives you 5 pearls. And you can get that research pretty quick and min cast it. And people probably won't fight too hard over it. There are a few globals that you'll need to watch out for. So one is Sea of Ice. So Sea of Ice can lock you in the water, and then you have to spend pearls to get out of the water. So that can be really bad. Another spell is the opposite, which is Thetis's Blessing, which allows everyone to come invade you. So that could be really bad as well. So I would say it's almost always good as Relay to maintain a Pearl Bank so that you can dispel certain harmful globals if you need to. Another one is Wrath of the Sea. And what this will do is essentially... nope, that's the wrong one. This one. It'll essentially ruin a lot of your coastal provinces, which you really rely on. So you definitely don't want that happening. I think the odds of that getting cast are pretty low, but it is something to watch out for. Something you should consider is Gift of Health if you go with a Tartarian strategy. Riches from Beneath can be good because more gold and resources means even more troops, so you can replace armies even faster. Forge of the Ancients might actually be good on Relay, since it'll allow you to build boosters faster and more cheaply, and it can it'll allow you to forge more items that you might otherwise struggle to forge because you don't have full slots in the mages trying to forge them. Another spell you can do is Strands of Arcane Power. It'd be kind of like a late game thing where you already control Nexus. But if you do that, then you can push your Dominion, and then you can Feeble Mind enemy Astral Mages. And then it's, you have a bunch of Astral Magic and they don't, which is a really good place to be. Especially if they can't bring anti-magic to fights where you're planning to do Master and Slave. A few other spells to watch out for is Burden of Time, which can really hurt your slave mages, hurt your economy. Utter Dark, just for the income malice, but I think you would handle it better than a lot of other nations because you do have dark vision options. Foul Air would be really bad because I think Unrest would hurt your income. I think it's unlikely to get cast in your game though. Gift of Nature's Bounty is something you could cast, but I'm not sure if it would help you as much as, like, because there does come a point where like an extra 200 troopers isn't going to matter. And I feel like that's what Gift of Nature's Bounty would do. And you would draw a lot more diplomatic aggro to yourself. So that might be one where it might bring more pain than what it's worth. But if you can get away with it, then it would be good. It kind of feels like a win more spell with Relay. I have a hard time imagining a position where you've got that many nature gems and you're thinking about winning more. So a couple other spells to watch out for is Purgatory. If you go with an Undead strategy, or Dark Skies, because it would really impact the crappy morale on your troopers and mages. A couple of good options for you to consider would also be Vengeful Waters for assassinating enemy commanders, and Lure of the Deep for essentially drowning their troops and commanders in coastal areas. And then The last one I would really watch out for is astral corruption. You don't have good blood access. Like, I know we're looking at this hero here, but you really don't. And so astral corruption going up would really kind of ruin your nation. So it would absolutely be worth immediately dispelling it. And it's another reason to keep a large pearl bank just for dispels if you need them. In terms of some key items, so looking at items, I just want to, I had watched a number of guides on EA Relay, and they had all talked about how important it was to take water and air on your pretender to make these amulets of the fish, so you can get your abelisks and mine lords out of the water. And don't get me wrong, it's important, but I don't think it's worth taking on your pretender. I took it on my pretender in my last game. I don't think I ever had my pretender craft an amulet of the fish. It was a big waste of design points, and I think you can use those on something else that's more useful. And if you're playing with like the hero, like worthy heroes, you can get this guy and he can do amulets of the fish, or you can just get a slave, like use Voice of Tiamat, search all your underwater provinces. You should get an air jump's worth of income, and eventually you can empower someone and they can craft amulets of the fish. But slave mages can do everything an aboleth or a mine lord can do in a communion, until like it's necessary to bring those like paths that high, because like the amulets of the fish start becoming really important in the late game. I don't think you need them for the mid game or the early game, so I don't think you need it on your pretender. You have a national ability to forge crystal gear, which is really strong, so I would take advantage of that. And it's another way to get air into your communions. In my last game, I got an event where I got a few air mages, and I was able to plug them right in. We talked about how hard it was to get boosters, so be aware. If you have a mage that can craft a particular booster, like be really careful to protect that mage. Don't throw them away. Another thing to remember is your troops have really bad morale, so making the morale items is definitely worth it. So like things like the Herald Lance, or the is it the helm? I think it was the helm. Helmet of Heroes, yeah. So that Herald Lance, Helmet of Heroes, and the it's like a Horn of Valor. Yeah. So this is a kit that I like to put on the slave princes, so that they can do +4 inspirational to their troops. And to save pearls, a really good replacement for the Herald Lance is the rat tail. I can remember the name. Here we go. Yeah, the rat tail. So, and it's because this one gives a taskmaster bonus instead. And if you put this kit on a slave prince, they'll actually get awe because of all of the inspiration and taskmaster bonuses. It's kind of interesting to see. So that's a like a set of items to consider. Another is it can be really good to have a few range boosting items. So Murdering Winter is a really good remote attack spell that you have access to, but you might want to cast it from the safety of a lake in case there's like I don't know, some sort of response. You don't want them, your own mage, to get remote attacked, like if you're using a naiad. So you give them some cold resist. I'm not even sure if the fire resist is needed. I'm not sure if Dome of Flaming Death can like hit underwater. I'd have to test it, but You can give a water lens though, and it gives a +1 range bonus, so now you can Murdering Winter an extra province away, which is really nice. And then you can also get access to the Starfire staff for if you need a gateway, 1 extra province. It can be really good for that. I used it in my Vanheim game to astral travel, and then I accidentally put it on a Merc. Another good one is the Arcane Lens, because this works for every path. So this is an especially good range booster. So just being able to, reach out an extra province or two can make a big difference. With the Arcane Lens and the Water Lens, you can Murdering Winter up to, I think, 6 provinces away. At that point, you can hit most armies on the map. Another thing to consider is you do have a national item, which is a little bit of an anti-elite or anti-thug weapon, is this Anemone Mace. So it's got a poison, it does poison damage and it does paralyze. So it's a pretty cool little item. It has +4 attack, but and +1 defense as well, so it can really help your attack score. So pretty cool little thug item that you can put on a commander to kind of, like, especially like your general with all the morale boosting items, you can also give them that. And you can stun enemies that get too close. Let's see. We talked about bloodstones. Another note is, because a lot of your mages are aquatic, and a lot of your mages are mermen, so they don't have feet underwater, you don't need to forge as many of the movement boosters that a lot of players end up forging in different games to get mages where they need to be. You'll still want a few, but you don't need as many as what other players will be doing. So you can use those gems on something else, which is pretty nice. So one more good thing about Relay. Another something that you might want to just have a couple in the lab, just because when you need it, you really need it, is a couple of command items. Things that boost the amount of troops that your mages can lead, either magic beings or regular troops. Because if you're doing like a big gateway or astral travel, or you have a bunch of morale items on one mage, like or one commander, like a sleeper, it can be really good. It can provide a lot of efficiency if you give them some command boosting items, and then you don't have to do a similar setup like cast 2 gateways. You can just give them this item, and then they can take all the people that they need to. Another thing to consider is, so maybe instead of forging more shoes, you'll end up forging more supply items. So it's really easy for you to get really big armies, and it can be hard to feed those armies. So getting some endless bags of wine and having those stored up ready to go can be really important. So definitely recommend that. And maybe you can put one on your gym meal, and they can do kind of like double duty for that. Another thing to consider is Girdles of Might. It's a missile slot. It's a miscellaneous slot item. It's pretty cheap on Earth Gems. And you can put it on an Aboleth. Gives them 3 reinvigoration, so they can cast spells more quickly. So just pretty good for them. I haven't tested the Flying Carpet, but that might be the best movement booster for your Aboleths and Mind Lords underwater without having to spend gems for teleporting. If you're able to get a hold of a Flying Carpet, that might work. Another thing that you have national access to through your Abadai is Shademail Hauberks. So you can take advantage of those to stealthily sneak mages that can wear armor into forts for big battles, or out of forts away from losing fights. especially if you get kicked off the water, that could be really important. So should be good to have one or two of those in the lab. Might come in handy. And then your other mages and troops can gateway or teleport out. And then I guess just two more sets of items to kind of be aware of is one would be research boosters. So definitely be on the lookout for Amber Clan. The Amber Clan fire variant mages can do double duty. Earlier in the game, they can make, I say earlier, but we're talking about the research lanterns, the fire boosters. So those are really good. And then later in the game, they can do manifest vitriol to get you the green lions, which are also good. And then if you go with a Tartarian strategy, but you don't take a recuperation bless, and maybe you're not controlling gift of health, so or no, if you do have the recuperation bless and you don't control gift of health, you can do some shrouds, and you can hand those out to tarts as part of our Tartarian strategy. So that was a really exhaustive kind of set of things to go through. I'm gonna flip off of the browser for now. Okay, I'm back. Alright, so I'm off of the browser, back onto the game. So that was a lot of stuff to go through, but I think it's important to go through that because I honestly feel like Relay is unfortunately a very high skill floor nation, so they're hard to play, but they also have a low skill ceiling, so it can be hard to play them really well and to win games, even if you do play them well. And I think that's why they have a reputation for being a D tier, or like a crap tier nation, basically. So one of the worst nations in the game, and it's just because of the sheer number of weaknesses that they run into. So I think it's important to really thoroughly go through all the different spells and items, because if you're going to play this nation, you're going to want to know what you can effectively use. And speaking of that, let's go into some of the strategies for Relay, now that we know the different spells and units and maybe like different directions that you would go for different gem sinks. So in the early game, there's a few different things you want to consider. One is you want to have really aggressive expansion. This was something I didn't do in my game. It was something I was trying. I was trying to do diplomacy through negotiation because I didn't want to lose armies and bumps. I wasn't confident about bumping into anyone. But it was really hard. It was harder than I expected it to be. I didn't expect Arco to be quite so obstinate. So I think it's good to be aggressive expanding underwater, especially if you're the only underwater nation. Like, go ahead and just charge onto land, because you can pretty easily kick anyone out of your lake. So just be really aggressive about setting good borders on land and starting to get set up with coastal recruiting. Another thing to consider is, besides expansion, is for your early game, you could do a little bit of a research rush in Turtle. Your troops are really bad, and it's not until like Alt 7 they're gonna remain really bad. You can try to augment them with water elementals at Conjuration 5, which is still fairly early game, but maybe consider just not even taking big fights. If you do end up in a war, just do raiding with troops. But don't do what I did and commit mages. I don't think it's worth it, and you're losing a lot of research. So just do light raiding with troops. You'll probably get kicked into the water. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. So just take it and start rushing down Alt 7 so you can take it back to them. Another alternative is rushing down construction for a research rush and getting those quills, those mentors, and lanterns. if you do end up with a Amber Clan province, it's definitely something to consider. So be on the lookout for that as an option during expansion. Another thing to consider is building more forts. I took horrific casualties in just about every engagement until I got to Alt 7. And so having a lot of forts to rapidly replace casualties, I think, is somewhat essential to the nation. And so, like, I would almost recommend forting every underwater province you get. And it's just so, because your mages are going to die, your troops are going to die. I mean, they're essentially human HP mages. Like, you're going to take casualties. And if you have magic skills, you want to really take advantage of research by hiring a lot of mages. So I think I definitely wouldn't recommend overbuilding infrastructure for most nations, but I feel like this is a nation where if you're the only underwater nation, it's probably good to overbuild it. Because you're going to have to replace so much crap. So just something to consider. Moving into the mid-game, you want to do the traditional water nation strategy of vulturing a lot. I made the mistake of taking too many casualties fighting Arco, especially mage casualties, so I wasn't prepared to vulture correctly because I was committing large stacks rather than small raiding groups. And if I'd been better prepared to vulture, I could have vultured from TNG's invasion of Uruk, could have been vultured Marverni more and gotten that fort. I could have vultured more of Helheim as well. And yes, that might have triggered a war with somebody else and they might have kicked me back into the sea. But it would have been far more profitable and I would have had more opportunities to make good plays and use diplomacy than what I did end up doing. Another thing to consider in the mid-game is teleporting to other lakes. Once you get all your infrastructure up at home, or maybe even before then, consider sending a Mind Lord. Like once you have Conjuration 5, you can teleport to another lake, maybe like 2 of them. You can do a bunch of water elemental spam, clear the province. You can even scry it first to make sure it's like something you can take. You teleport there, you wipe it with water elementals, you build a lab, and then you can gateway in more troops and you can build a fort there, and now it's your lake. So definitely something to consider, and you can do that even against other nations, and most nations aren't going to be able to fight you over it unless they have like a monolith that can teleport underwater and kill water elementals, stuff like that. Also in the mid-game, that's when your communions come online. So using your crystal gear, whatever paths you happen to have acquired can all be wired into a communion. So definitely make sure to take care of the fatigue on your communions. Watch out for that. But also, like, this is a big strength of your nation is your communion, so make sure to take advantage of them. Also, make sure to have, because it is human HP mages, make sure you script redundancy on your mages. I had big spells not go off in my last relay campaign because I only had one mage casting a certain spell, like Solar Brilliance. That mage died to crumble, which was really unlucky, but I didn't have a backup mage scripted to do that. And I think with relay, with considering your armies are damn near worthless without certain magic getting casted, you need to make sure that magic gets casted, and if that means casting it 2 or 3 times, then that's what you need to do. Also in the mid-game, your fatigue plays potentially come online with Quagmire, Rigor Mortis, Curse of Stones, so definitely consider that as an option. Slave troopers are perfectly capable of killing troops that don't hit them back. So definitely consider that as an option, and you can use rain, like any tools that you can have to slow down the battle would be great here. So fatigue plays are definitely an option for relay. Another option you have for dealing with enemy thugs is Mind Hunt spam. So it's pretty easy for you to get to Astral 4. And so I would probably use like a crystal coin and a skull cap on Astral 2 slave mages. And I'd use them to do it. I wouldn't want to risk Abolus getting feeble-minded. Another thing that you can do really easily is Foul Vapors traps. So it's really easy for you to get like, I don't know, 100 troops that you don't care about, set up a nature mage behind them, and do a Foul Vapors trap and ruin an enemy army. And this kind of goes into what I'm thinking is like the way that you have to play Relay to deal with enemy doom stacks is you end up having to run 2 armies where the first army is their sole job is to ruin the enemy army, like just pile on afflictions, make their troops worthless, and then your second army comes in and kills it. So Foul Vapors is good for that. Solar Brilliance is good for that. I think Astral Tempest might be good for that. So just different things to consider. Like consider in that first army, you would consider spells. There's an astral spell that I think can apply disease. Astral fires, maybe? I don't know. But yeah, just consider having a throwaway army, which you can do really easily, where you ruin the enemy army, and then you follow up with a second army that maybe you only care about more because there's more mages in it, and then use that army to kill the enemy army. So you might have to do something where you take 2 fights, and maybe the enemy army just walks away, but you've already done what you needed to do. Another thing to consider is maybe this is a little bit more tricky, but is turbo communions. You have Abolus and Mind Lords that have piles of HP. You have grandmothers with 100 HP. You can absolutely wire them into a communion and have them be the slave, and then maybe have a nature mage added to the communion, and they can do personal regen, so it gives them regen, and then you can cast all sorts of nasty spells using those giant HP pools. So that's something to consider. And then when you get to the late game, I feel like that's when Relay starts to fall off, which is really sad because they have such a hard time getting it going, and now they're already falling off. If you're losing, you have Mind Duel spam, or Magic Duel, yeah. And I mean, you have tons of Astral Mages. You have high Astral, so maybe you have a Mind Lord do it, and just hope they get a lot of lucky rolls and maybe kill 3 or 4 enemy Astral Mages. I had my Pretender, who is Astral 9, do some Mind Duels, because Astral 1s and 2s just aren't going to win those. There's no way. They can't, because it's each party rolls a d6. So even if they roll a 6, they're only at like Astral 7 or 8. My guy's Astral 9, also rolling a d6. So definitely something you can do. We already kind of talked about that 2-army approach. I think that gets even more relevant. The way it changes later in the game is once you have astral travel, you can magic phase that initial army that's meant to ruin the enemy army, and then you can movement phase the army that's going to kill it. And so you can do the 1-2 punch in 1 turn, which I think is pretty cool. In terms of some strategic goals in the late game, you have Nexus. I think this nation absolutely wants to put up Nexus. You need so many pearls. And so Nexus is a great way to solve that need for astral pearls. You have Whoosh, which you have so many options with Wish. But yeah, you have Wish. You can break into magic diversity with Wish. You can get more super combatants. You can kill troublesome enemy pretenders. Lots of things you can do with Wish. You can jump into the Immortal game, which we talked about with Wraith Lords, Liches, stuff like that. You can build, you can break into High Death and do Tartarians, which also gives you magic diversity and super combatants. I mean, you might have to pay 50, 60 gems for each one between like 2 or 3 summons and then a Gift of Reason, but I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do to get these super combatants to stay on par in the late game. And it uses death and nature gems, which you're not as starved for as you are like your pearls. Additionally, you want to make sure that you have paths to, because you have like human HP communions, you need to stop being entirely reliant on that by the late game, so you need to have higher HP casters. And that's where the Tartarians and the Immortals and Vine Ogres and Troll Kings and Sea Kings, that's where all that stuff comes in. Is having those, and Elemental Royalty is having those like big heavy thug and super combatant high HP chassis for casting your big battlefield magic that you need. Another obvious late game thing is your charm and slave spam. You can put nature on your communion, and all your nature mages can do charm spam. You have astral built into it, so you can do tons of enslave mind. You can do master enslave with high astral mages. You can really be oppressive with the amount of crap that you steal, and maybe you can get some good troops out of it too. And if it's just one more reason to take a good pin bonus on your bless. So, and then finally is your big go-to remote is Murdering Winter spam. And that's because you can use the range boosters, get it out to range 6, and you can cast it from underwater, and they can't cast it back at you because you're underwater. So you can cast it from underwater, but it can't target underwater, which is somewhat oppressive against certain nations. So, and especially if you run a Cold Dominion, it can make that even better for you. So I like the idea of doing Murdering Winter spam, and you can do that pretty safely from underwater. And so, some research goals. I'm only going to cover research goals for the early game because you need all the research to like really turn this nation on. You need so many 9s. It's annoying. So one of your earliest goals though should be Conjuration 5 for water elementals. That's like your official entry point into the early mid game. And it can help with dealing with, as sad as it is to say, it might allow you to do land raiding because your slave troopers might suck that bad that they can't handle 6 PD. So maybe they need a water elemental or 2. Another good goal is Construction 6 for the research rush, Alt 7 for having proper mid-game armies, or you can do Enchantment 7 for Foul Vapor Traps, so you have several options. Worth considering the pros and cons of each, and it'll depend on your situation what you end up going with. And then from there, it's all based on your situation, but at some point you're going to want Enchantment 9 for Nexus. It just kind of sucks because it's hard to cast a lot of the enchantment spells, so you're not going to get a lot of help on your way down to Enchantment 9, which is what I ran into in my game. All your easy to cast spells are in Alteration, so you could find yourself kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, chasing Nexus, but you do need Nexus as like your entry point into the late game. And because you need Nexus, and Nexus scales with the number of players in the game, if you can somehow, like I ended up playing Relay in a 9-person lobby, but if you can somehow get a 12 or 16 player lobby, or somehow, some way, you are the only underwater nation, or maybe there's another one and you win that underwater fight, then Nexus really scales hard, and Nexus can be really good. And you should have the time to be able to actually cast it, because the game shouldn't end that quickly. So, something to consider. Um, I probably shouldn't have even tried to go for Nexus in my game, just because of I should have gone for Alt 9 to get the Army of Gold, Army of Lead, because I just wasn't going to have time to take advantage of Nexus, and there weren't enough players left to really get my money's worth from it. For the so I guess now we can start talking about pretenders. Finally. So let me pull up some of those. And so I kind of like pre-built 4, but there's like a number of different things to talk about. So the first one is you can get into some Mind Vessel shenanigans with this Aboleth Pretender. It has the Aboleth tag. So it's a really easy way to get those Astral 5 Androids, I believe. And you can like get an Astral 5, you can twice spawn it if it's a death random, and then you can make it your profit, and you can have a teleporting twice spawned Astral 5, which is pretty cool. Something else to consider is you can really control your Dominion. I talked about how strong your priests were earlier, so definitely you probably don't need to run more than Dominion 4 unless you're looking at an underwater fight, or maybe you want more of your Mind Blasters. But you even have a non-sacred version of that, so I'm not sure. I'm having a hard time thinking of when you'd want more than 4 Dominion, because you just have so many different ways to control it. So I'd use those paths on scales. And with this guy, I did Death 2, so he could twice spawn himself easily. And Water 2, so you could do water elementals. Power the spheres and then water elementals. So just like different options for him. But and then for this one, went with Arcane Finesse, so that's the penetration bless. I think you want this on Relay. You just have so many things that rely on penetration. You have Soul Slay, Mind Hunt, all your different battlefield things, your Enslave Mind and Charm spam, your Mind Blasters, like so many different things will want this bless that I think it's, and there's so few other things that really matter for your nation, that I really like Arcane Finesse, and I really like 2 times Arcane Command, so your priest can lead raiding parties. And then the magic resistance is like, it's just a nice bonus, but like these two are the 2 I really like. Magic is nice because it, I believe with Magic 2, you get another pin bonus, so this actually gives 2 between the scales and the plus. Luck gives you gold to help you build your early game forts faster. Growth gives you more money because your nation uses a lot of gold, especially if you get Loboguard and Shambler Thralls, and your mages are 175, and you want a lot of them. So I'd definitely go Order 3, Growth 3, and if you can manage it, Luck 3. And you also want Magic 3. I'm really a big fan of scales for this nation. And then production is the one that you can definitely consider doing a little bit less of. Your troops don't use a lot of resources, but having more production is nice. because it gives you a little bit more money, so you get a little bit of a money boost. This particular build also takes advantage of doing the cold scales for fitting in with Murdering Winter, fitting in with Yetis and Undead and stuff like that, and making fire effects weaker. And I think it nerfs rain's ability to help you since it turns it into snow. So I don't think rain is as effective in Cold 3, but overall there's a lot of pluses to Cold 3. There's a quirky thing with where your income or the temperature, like dumping that temperature scale, won't affect your income in deep seas, and the temperature only truly moves plus or minus 1 for normal seas. So it's basically a free scale underwater, but it will affect you on land, and you'll take a big income hit of 15% when it goes to Cold 3. But I do like Cold 3. Knowing that now that I saw those YouTube comments, so I like the idea of Cold 3. It is going to hurt your old slave mages. They're going to take more fatigue, so you'll have to take that into account when designing communions. And he's got some cool abilities like Soul Leech, Enslaved Mind, Theft of Life, so you can do some cool stuff at range. He gets 5 of these, so let's see. The next pretender that I'll look at is this guy, Farcaster. So another part that you can add to the bless is you dump one of the points of Arcane Command, so your slave priests are going to be taking fewer Shambler thralls, and you might only need 1 point actually, because 10 Shambler thralls and some slave troopers is probably what you want for a raid against 6 PD, so this is perfect. And then you can take Farcaster. Now, Farcaster is not going to matter for most of your spells, but it will help for Frozen Heart. So it can allow you to reach across the map with that, and that'll be really nice. And then you still have Arcane Finesse. This particular build isn't going to do the Mind Vessel shenanigans, but you don't get the income malice, so this one's not doing cold scales, and you still have really good scales without the income malice. So this is one that you would take for controlling coastal land and then doing like trade wind spam to really bump up the income. So this is more of a gold focused build, potentially greedier. And then there's this one, this one will allow you to help out your troopers a little bit more. So what you can do is you can throw on the shroud on your commanders and give them inspirational +1, and then your priests will also get it just by blessing themselves. They'll get inspirational, and they also get +30 leadership. So now your priests can lead large raiding parties without a I mean, it's still just going to be a block of troops. They're not good commanders, but they can do it without a morale penalty. That's really important when your troops start out with 7 morale. And getting 1 more leadership on your troops is definitely good. Even if you do the plus morale items, like an additional +1 is even better. And this also breaks you into fire for lanterns. So this is really good for doing coastal raiding. It's really good for a research rush behind that coastal raiding. You still have the 2x arcane command, so now your priests are leading around all sorts of troops, if that's what you want, while your mages research. And then you still have Farcaster and Arcane Finesse for when you finally do roll out your mages. So, and like, you're not going to have a lot of mages that can take advantage of this, but your Mind Vessel candidates and your Androdays and your Abidies can all take advantage of the Farcaster, Arcane Finesse stuff. So when you start rolling them out later in the game with Amulets of the Fish, then this is really good. Additionally, I forget. I think this also gives you access to some interesting spells like Solar Brilliance. And maybe there's some, I don't know, opening up fire magic on this nation definitely gives you some new options, but you'll probably have to teleport with an Amulet of the Fish to be able to cast a lot of them. So that's the downside to having fire magic underwater, but this Bless is pretty nice. And then the last one I was thinking about was maybe this guy. So this guy can still do the Mind Vessel spam. He has a little bit harder time. He can still do Wish if you give him like a Ring of Sorcery and a Crystal Coin. And then he still has the Death 2, Water 2, and he still has the Inspirational Presence. 3 times Arcane Command, so you do lose Farcaster, but I mean, let's be real, Frozen Heart already has a pretty far range, so you'll be okay. And then you also have Arcane Finesse, so you still have your penetration bonus. So if I were to run another game as Relay, I would definitely consider this one. This is a pretty good pretender. You have something to help out your shitty troops. You can lead your troops with priests, like your slave priests, so all your mages can just spend their time doing a research rush. You can craft fire boosters, which is really handy, and you have a pin bonus for later in the game. So doing a research rush is really nice because Relay really wants like all the 9s, and so if you can rush down those 9s really quickly by having a lot of like research boosters, especially using maybe some of your death gems in the early game, your fire income from Voice of Tiamat, and some of your pearl, or not pearls, what's the other research? Alquils. So if you get a little bit of air access, then you can do Alquils as well. And between those 3 boosters, hopefully you can just pump out a ton of research. So I don't know. I like this guy. He has Taskmaster +3 too, which is kind of nice. So he can definitely lead some stuff. Yeah, so I really like this guy. If I were to play another game, I would consider running this guy. You're running the Cold Scales for improved Murdering Winter. And so you're not going to have quite as much gold with this guy, especially with the coastal stuff, but it's what I needed. I did end up needing to dump the scale to be able to get to like Order 3, Luck 3 to get the gold events, to get the forts out early, and then Magic 3 and Growth 3. So you should still have enough gold to pump out a lot of mages, and hopefully you have enough, even more gold in the early game to get all the forts down. And then you can get a lot of mages and a lot of research and put boosters on those mages, and your slave priests are just doing light raiding whenever there's opportunities. So that's kind of the plan with this guy. Really like him. Yeah, I think if I were to play another game, I'd run it with this guy. I think that's it. I think that's all the notes that I had. I did take a lot of notes for this one. So hopefully I didn't bore you guys to death, and hopefully if you plan on playing this nation, I gave you some ideas to consider, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.